1115 for Republicans, and 202-737-6734 for others.
Halloween 1997. Welcome to Friday's Washington Journal. We have an abbreviated program this morning. The House comes in at 9. Therefore, we'll have a newspaper roundtable up next. And our two guests, Joe Conason of the New York Observer and Ann Coulter will be with us for the first hour. And then we'll speak to 4 Chinese students that we'll introduce to you in about an hour. Students from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the People's Republic of China. They'll be in our downstairs studio, and we'll talk about Jiang Zemin's visit. First up, though, if we look at the New York Times this morning and the editorial page, they lead with Mr. Babbitt's troubling testimony, and the first line is, "The most troubling day in Bruce Babbitt's public career ended in an inconclusive stalemate." Later on, they say it seems to us, as much as we admire Mr. Babbitt's record at Interior, his unconvincing legalisms were eerily reminiscent of Vice President Gore's contorted assertion that no controlling legal authority governed his fundraising phone calls. However, the investigation turns out it is clear that even the shiniest reputation gets abraded when rubbed up against Mr. Clinton's fundraising machine. Joe Conason, you've written about the New York Times editorials. You want to take on that one?
Well, I watched some of Babbitt's testimony, and I have to say, I think this was probably, in some ways, the worst day for the White House in the whole, from my point of view. I mean, I found it troubling that the events, took place the way they apparently did. And the fact that Bruce Babbitt has probably one of the best reputations in the Clinton cabinet is fortunate. It's more of Clinton's good luck that this happened with somebody who I think generally has a good reputation in Washington and the country. Has never been sort of tarred with brush of corruption or even log rolling before. So they're fortunate that if something like this had to happen, it happened with Babbitt. On the other hand, I think it was fair to say that, there's no convincing proof that this didn't happen the way the Republicans are charging, and there isn't any, final proof that it did. It's his word against the word of a lobbyist, who, by the way, was sent to him because he was thought to have connections to Babbitt, too. I mean, the reason Paul Eckstein was up there testifying against Babbitt was because he was hired by the Chippewa on the basis that he was a law school friend of Babbitt's, and this is how the system works, and they were going to try to get him with that guy. The only convincing thing I think the Democrats said was that this was a project, the Hudson Casino was a project that a lot of people opposed, including Tommy Thompson, but then a whole list of other politicians and community leaders in Wisconsin. And therefore, they could make the case that the decision was made on the merits, but that doesn't prove that it wasn't also influenced by campaign cash. So,
Ann Coulter, your take on all this?
I think you're right, although I think it sort of goes the other way on Babbitt being one of the most apparently clean and honest administration officials. But in a way, I mean, that's sort of eerie. I mean, it really now looks like it is such a corrupt administration that even their most sort of upstanding Boy Scout is corrupted by this. And I do think it is one of the worst things to come out of the campaign finance hearings because it is so. It is as close to a bribery charge as they have, and I think it's hard to avoid saying that that's what it is. And in addition to what you mentioned, I think this claim that I was raising Ickey's name to Eckstein, which was what Paul Eckstein has said. Interestingly, on the cover story of the New York Times, which describes the Babbitt article, they don't mention Eckstein's testimony at all. It's all about Babbitt. You have to turn to page 824 to get 2 paragraphs on what Eckstein said. One thing Eckstein said was that when he was in the office, in Babbitt's office, Babbitt said that Harold Ickes wants action on this quickly. Babbitt's explanation later in the day for that was, I was just trying to get him out of my office, which I don't really understand. Say you're taking a phone call then.
Well, he had said that actually before he testified. I mean, he wrote 2 conflicting accounts of this before he ended up testifying yesterday, and I don't think that didn't. Well, the other one was he at first denied that he'd said anything about Harold Ickes and so forth, and then he said, well, I did mention Harold Ickes because I want to get rid of this old pal of mine, and I thought that would get rid of him. That's thought to be the way to get rid of somebody who's prevailing on you is also not very good. But I think this is worse because this is one of the few cases where you can actually see the quo for the quid. I mean, in most of the other cases,
that's right.
In fact, the administration ended up turning down the people who wanted something from it. They got a meeting, they got 2 meetings, you know, but in most of the other cases that have been brought up in the campaign finance scandal,
or there's no link. Sometimes there's clearly a plausible quo and a clearly
wanted
plausible
things like
quid.
Pauline Kenchinalik, a name from months ago, who I don't think we'll ever hear again, came in. She wanted something from Commerce and didn't get it. I mean, they gave a lot of money, they got some meetings, and then ultimately their project was turned down. And that's what happened in most of these cases. This is a case where the people who gave the most money seem to have gotten what they wanted, and I think that's where the damning part of it lies.
Joe Conason of the New York Observer and Ann Coulter of Human Events and lots of other things. A lawyer, Ann Coulter is. I don't believe Joe Conason is.
No.
I want to ask Ann Coulter to start on this one. And the New York Times has a second take in their editorial this morning. They say in a separate arena on Capitol Hill, the chances of cleaning up the nation's elections suddenly seemed brighter yesterday. Yielding to pressure from supporters of reform, Trent Lott agreed to schedule an up-and-down vote on the McCain-Feingold campaign finance bill in early March. Senator Tom Daschle showed real fortitude in getting all 45 Democrats to withhold action on a popular highway spending bill absent a guarantee vote on campaign reform. Their tactics forced Mr. Lott to give in. The main victory belonged to Senator John McCain, the Arizona Republican who defied his party colleagues by pushing for the soft money ban.
Yes, the New York Times is always very enthusiastic about Republicans who defy party leaders. Actually, I don't think McCain is the winner. He's going to lose. Lott has held this off and held this off. I have to say, Senator Lott has been extremely good on what the New York Times deems campaign finance reform, and really is nothing more than limiting people's access to what politicians are doing, to reading New York Times editorials. So, of course, the New York Times does want these limits. Incumbents want these limits, and labor, which isn't subject to the limits at all, want the limits. But fortunately, there are enough Republicans, including Senator Lott, who don't want these limits. And he's going to lose the vote. They've been pushing the Democrats and McCain and saying they're going to bring it up for every single vote that comes up, including this iced tea vote, and just stall things, filibuster, get nothing done, hold up appropriations. So, okay, there's going to be one more vote, but that's going to be the end of it. So I think Lott has really done nothing more than find an appropriate way to get past this impasse while appearing to give them something, but he's giving them nothing. They're going to lose.
Well, you know, having criticized the Times editorial page, I have to say at least they're consistent, unlike the Republicans. The Republicans like to hold hearings about campaign finance, but they don't want to change the system at all. In other words, the bad appearance that's created by what happened in the Department of Interior over this Indian tribe's contributions is, you know, they think that's actually a fine way of doing business, and they don't want to change it. Well,
and
they don't mind the
we
appearance.
didn't want to have campaign finance hearings on the entire system. We wanted to have it on the felonies.
Let me finish. I didn't interrupt you. They don't want to change the system that creates these kind of appearances, not only with the White House and departments of, federal departments, but with the Congress all the time, every day, in many, many cases. They'd like to leave it the way it is. At least the New York Times wants to change the system, as well as criticizing the administration and the Congress. So I think that is a sound editorial on their part. But I also think that it took holding up pork barrel to force Trent Lott to allow this to be voted on, even though it's clearly the will of a vast number of people in the Congress and on the outside that there be an up or down vote on this bill. Let's have a vote. Let's not try to bury the bill and not have a vote, because if the Republicans believe, as you do, that we should allow the wealthy to dominate the political system, then let them stand up and say it. They should stand up and say it. Now, the second part of it is...
You would be tempting me to interrupt you if you didn't keep characterizing my position, and, I might add, mischaracterizing it. That is not the position to have the rich dominate. The position is that it shouldn't be the New York Times, labor, and incumbents. You can either have more speech or less speech.
Labor would be restricted by soft money restrictions. You can't. If you were a labor union, you wouldn't be able to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into the Democratic Party any more than any corporation or rich individual would be able to.
But they're not regulated. They can spend as much money as they want talking about politicians.
Well,
what you're talking about when you say
funding
is funding speech. Speech, you may as well say we're having the Publishing Reform Act. You can not spend money publishing books on communist tracts or socialist tracts. You can talk about that being money, but if what you're using the money for is to publish speech, and here, speech that's at the core of the First Amendment, political speech, that is, talking about what politicians say, that's what they want to regulate. They want to limit what we can say about politicians. Republicans believe, unlike how you just characterized our position, that more speech is better.
Well, the effect of that, though, is obviously that the rich are going to have more speech and they're going to have more of a say in the
unlike
political
now.
system. Well, you know, that is the way it is
It's
now.
always better to
That's
be
what
rich
soft
than
money is
poor.
about, and that's why the Republicans would rather have no soft money restrictions. They raised $200 million more than
And
the
smaller
Democrats in soft
donations
money
than the
last year.
Democrats. The
Well, small
Republicans,
donations,
the average
large
Republican
donations,
donation is about $5 to $10. The Democrats
case, I'm not
can't
sure.
release how much their average donation is because it is mainly from Barbara Streisand and Hollywood money.
Well,
the average Republican
they're
donation is
willing
much
to give
smaller,
it up,
but they get a
though.
lot of
They're
it.
willing to give it up, though.
Let's grab a call here from Ripley, Mississippi. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to mention two articles that were in Sunday's Commercial Appeal from Memphis. One by James Brosnan, who is the Memphis Commercial Appeal correspondent, is on the front page about Senator Bill Frist's campaign being fined $16,000 for campaign illegalities. Now, Senator Bill Frist is the son of the family who owns the Columbia Health System, which has been fined horribly for illegalities. He was a heart transplant surgeon. This man was willing to give up a heart transplant surgery practice to run for senator. And then also on the front page, well, it was later on in the Commercial Appeal, an article, and I don't know who this committee is that he's being considered to be in charge of that would be concerned with health affairs. Now, here is a man who gave up a heart transplant surgeon to be a U.S. senator, and he's being put in charge of a health committee. Well, now, if his family has been charged with all of these illegalities in connection with the Columbia Health System, and his campaign was found guilty and charged and fined, you know, it just seems strange to me that a famous heart surgeon, whose family is so involved in the health system would be put in charge of a committee that would have so much influence.
Kank's caller, and his brother's now the CEO of the Columbia HCA hospital system. You want to respond?
Yes, I would. In fact, Bill Frist is one of the wealthiest, he may be the wealthiest member, right? He's. I don't think this is because he needs the money, and part of the reason he, as well as so many other senators, are enormously wealthy is that the campaign finance laws are so incredibly complex that it's very easy to trip over. You need a battery of lawyers and a battery of, you know, campaign finance advisors not to end up with a fine. About 3 weeks ago, the New York Times had, I think, its largest headline on the campaign finance scandal, so to speak, yet, and it was over one of these, the Democratic Party, you know, mixing soft or hard money or something. And even when the Democrats do it, I mean, I criticized that headline too. I think that was somewhat, well, that's right. And I think it also was not deserving of a 3-inch headline.
Well, I mean,
it was like getting Bonnie and Clyde on a speeding ticket.
It helps to get elected if you're rich. And it helps, you can elect people who share your views if you're rich. And that's the problem with the system we have now. It disenfranchises poor and working class people to a great degree, and it will continue to do so unless we have some kind of real reform.
Joe Conason lives in New York City. He's executive editor of the New York Observer. Went to Brandeis University and Coulter's hometown originally.
New Canaan.
New Canaan, Connecticut. A Cornell graduate, University of Michigan Law School graduate. On the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, Clinton Gore set aside a weekend with donors. This is a $3 million fundraiser. It starts tonight on Amelia Island, $50,000 a couple. The Democratic National Committee will not release the names of the couples that are attending, although the press has some access down there. We go to Allentown, Pennsylvania next. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I have an article from the Allentown Morning Call. It's GOP senators say Clinton staff stalls.
GOP senators say Clinton's staff stalls. What's it say?
It says face-to-face with the White House lawyers, they've criticized Senate Republicans on Wednesday accused the attorneys of trying to impede a campaign fundraising investigation by withholding documents and videotapes. I just wanted to say it just seems like, you know, we get drips and drabs, and, you know, I'm just wondering how long this is going to take. I mean, they only have till December 31st, and from what I even understand, before the White House even lets go of these tapes, they have to review them. Well, how are they allowed to review them before they even release them?
Thanks. Joe Conason?
Well,
They have to see if it's responsive.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as a rule, no White House releases documents of any kind without reviewing them. They don't just send them out willy-nilly. They have to look at them for a whole variety of reasons. Now, you know, there are all kinds of comparisons made to Watergate, and I've written about this. I mean, it took a year, and it went to the Supreme Court before Richard Nixon released his tape, so I don't think there's any comparison there. On the other hand, I think, you know, from the point of view of the White House, they'd be better off if they had released all this stuff sooner, and if they had given up the videotapes or found them or whatever happened earlier in the summer than now. All that happens now is they look bad, they end up giving up the material anyway, which they have in every case, even though in one case it took, you know, the dispute went to the point where counsel was almost held in contempt by the Congress over their disagreement of whether Congress should have certain documents. But they've ended up giving up all the documents in every case eventually. And all they've done with resistance that in the end was futile was to make themselves look less than forthcoming. I think that's a mistake on their part. But I don't think it means they've been dishonest.
And Coulter, what do you think of this story? That the Philadelphia Inquirer is the only one that puts it on the front page. The Clinton-Gore set aside a weekend for donors, with donors.
Wouldn't you like to know who those donors are? Just out of idle curiosity.
Well,
it's a weekend for free speech.
They will have to publish who they are by January, but
right.
They're not willing to put the names out now because they, as Steve Grossman says, the Democratic National Committee, that they have a right to their privacy.
Well, that's the same kind of dumb mistake I was just talking about. In other words, although on the party level rather than the administration level, they should, you know, the fact is there are a lot of Republican events where they don't give out the names right away, too. We've had people go to Republican fundraisers in New York and not been allowed in the room, let alone handed a list of names. And in fact, there is no legal requirement for them to give.
That is incorrect. I mean, they have, in a lot of cases, by delaying, given themselves huge benefits. That is to say, turning over the documents of the billing records is just one example. And the billing records...
The billing records didn't show anything.
Yes, they showed something incredibly significant that the Commission had been looking for and looking for and looking for, and that's who drafted the option agreement that was specifically used to defraud the RTC, and the RTC admitted that this was the document, the option agreement was used to defraud us and whitewater it over and over again. The one thing they weren't sure of is who drafted that option agreement. It took the billing records showing up in the residence of the White House to determine, Hillary Clinton is the one who drafted the fraudulent document.
Didn't show anything about that she was trying to defraud anybody. Didn't show she was trying to defraud anybody.
There was no question about the fraudulent character of it. The only question was who drafted it. There was absolutely no one.
There was no showing whatsoever that she had any intent to defraud anybody. She was drafting a legal instrument for somebody that they may have used for some bad purpose. But, well,
you were
what's
the first person in the history of this investigation to contest that this particular option agreement drafted with was used to defraud the RTC.
We're talking about
there was
Castle
no
Grande
question
now, right?
At that point.
We're talking about Castle
Yes.
Grande.
There was no question about that. RTC admitted it. Everyone admitted the only question was.
You're not understanding me, Ann.
Who drafted this document?
You're talking, but you're not understanding me. There was no showing ever, and there hasn't been to date, that she had any intent to defraud anybody when she drafted that piece of paper for that company.
That there hasn't been a conviction in a court. Yes, the statute of limitations had run.
There hasn't even been an accusation. No indictment, nothing.
Of course there has. It's all part of the Whitewater report, but unfortunately it came out at the end.
On the Washington Journal on this October 31st, our guest, Joe Conason of the New York Observer and Coulter of Human Events. And the editorial this morning in the Wall Street Journal calls the Jiang Zemin visit a successful summit. And then later on in the editorial says it's one good visit by Mr. Jiang to the U.S., but it doesn't put his country in the World Trade Organization or obviate the need for continued strong U.S. military deterrent or reduced America's moral commitment to the interests of the Dalai Lama, Hong Kong's Martin Lee, or the free people of Taiwan. We'll talk more about that after we take this call from Tallahassee. Good morning, Tallahassee. You're on the air.
Good morning. I want to speak about campaign reform. We have two gangs of liars up on Capitol Hill, each one trying to outdo the other, neither one wanting to admit their greed. The only campaign reform that is needed is a law that says that you cannot contribute to anyone for whom you cannot vote.
Go back to your statement about liars. Give us some examples of where you say that, prove that they've been lying.
Well, people on Capitol Hill?
Yeah.
You asked me to illustrate the obvious. Every time we hear about the holier-than-thou attitude of the Republicans talking about campaign infractions, campaign contribution infractions by the Democrats, and we hear the Democrats come back and holler. Obviously, someone has to be lying, and obviously there is a shade of gray here in which both are telling the truth and in which both are lying.
Where are you on the political spectrum? You ever been a member of a party?
I used to register as a Democrat because the local structure of politics here in this part of the country, but I shifted over to a Republican so I could vote for in the primaries.
And
otherwise, I am absolutely an independent in thought.
on Saturday night, by the way, C-SPAN will cover the Reform Party convention, which includes a speech by Ross Perot. That'll be live Saturday night. Okay. You work for Spence Abraham?
Yes.
United States Senator from Michigan. How long?
2 years.
This man indicted all the Republicans up there on Capitol Hill as being liars when it comes to this issue. Would you like to defend the Republicans?
Not Senator Abraham. I didn't really get the specificity of it, but
you, I mean,
I don't
in
want
general,
to be in a
he's
position of defending politicians.
well, but in general, he's saying they're all lying up there, and that's basically what I want both of you to address. Are they on this issue?
You mean, I don't understand what his charge is.
I think it's lying is a way for the caller to accuse them of hypocrisy on this issue. And I would say accusing a politician of hypocrisy is like accusing a mother of motherhood. I mean, it's not, it's not shocking particularly. On the other hand, I do think that on this particular issue, a lot of the politicians have mixed feelings about it. I think, on the one hand, some of them are afraid of losing an advantage, a partisan advantage, one way or the other, if certain changes are made. On the other hand, I think a lot of them are kind of sick of raising money. If you talk to any of them, you'll find that they spend an incredible amount of time raising money trying to get reelected.
Though
obviously, and it's a drag. It's not fun to call somebody up. I don't know. Most people have never had this experience to get on the phone, call somebody up, and ask them for money. Even if you have something to sell them, even if you have, some hold over them or some connection to them, it's still very difficult. And I think a lot of them would like to see it changed in some way so that they don't spend their lives calling people up and asking for $1,000 or $10,000, whatever it is.
And Coulter, are they tired of raising money like this?
Surely, though, it's easier for an incumbent to do that than some pathetic no-name challenger or even a well-known challenger. He has no benefits to hand out. Moreover, any senator very easily, and to some extent, any congressman, at least where it matters, and that is where his voters are, can create his own campaign ad that isn't a campaign ad, and that costs him nothing by bringing pork back to the district, by giving some speech on the floor, by having a morning business speech. He can create an event because he's a government official, and that's why it helps incumbents the more difficult it is to raise money, because the challengers have a lot more trouble than an incumbent.
On C-SPAN's Washington Journal, Roswell, Georgia. Good morning.
Well, good morning. Sitting here looking through the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and looking for information about the Education Savings Account bill, which will be discussed today, I think, in the Senate. It was passed last week in the House. Unfortunately, I see this as a piece of unneeded legislation that is being touted as a wonderful thing for education by the supporters, and also as the end of public education by the opponents.
Can you define what the Education Savings Account would actually do?
It allows parents to set up a savings account for their children, and the gains is very similar to an IRA, and the gains would accrue tax-free, so that the parents theoretically could use the funds and the gains for educational purposes.
Is this good or bad in your opinion?
Well, it sounds great. Unfortunately, if you look at the amount of gains that you would accrue over the first 5 years, in which you could put in $2,500, it amounts to I don't know, maybe on an average of $50 to $100 a year. I can do the same thing today by using any one of 1,000 tax-free municipal bond funds, mutual funds, without any need for any new legislation.
All right, thanks. Ann Coulter, Joe Coniston, your opinion?
Well, I'm skeptical of these kind of schemes, in part because I do support public education. I think it's the reason we have a public education system is to have some forum for making citizens together out of people and not having a totally class-based system of education the way some countries have had in the past, and some still do. I think it's good if people are educated together in one place. I went to public schools, and I'm glad I did. On the other hand, people have a lot of trouble paying for college, for example, middle-class families, and they're concerned about that. What strikes me about this is that when this kind of thing is proposed, no one says, oh, we're going to drive up the price of private school, which is what was said when the president brought out his bill, which is to encourage savings for college. No one, you can make the same arguments against this that were made against Clinton's bill to encourage tuition savings for college, which was that this will drive up the cost of schooling the same way. They'll raise their prices the more money there is in the market, and I think that may well be true.
It's funny, my reaction to that is almost exactly my reaction to the campaign finance reform. You want to limit the influence of money, so you want more regulations. I want to limit the influence of money, so I want fewer regulations. You want less of a caste system in education, so you want public education, and perhaps not these education finance accounts, and I'd like to limit the caste system, so I want them. Because they go not only to the private schools, and that is a point well taken. Whenever the government subsidizes something, all it really does is increase the price of that thing in the open market. But this also goes to, it can be used by public school students to hire tutors, to buy computers. It's not just for the cost of tuition itself, which is why so many Democrats, including Floyd Flake, have endorsed it now. It's anything associated with the cost of education.
Floyd Flake may be on the verge of switching parties pretty soon when he's leaving the Congress anyway, but
I'd welcome him wholeheartedly.
I take your point, yeah.
On Tuesday next, there will be elections for 233 mayors in the United States. Your newspaper, the New York Observer, Joe Coniston, has a story that leads the paper. The city's going giddy as Rudy's Revolution rolls down Broadway. Mr. Giuliani is not meeting with Jiang Zemin, the Chinese leader. Neither is Governor Pataki, neither did George Allen.
Just as well for Chinese-American relations.
But back to the Chinese visitor, the editorials are all over the place this morning. The Wall Street Journal says that it calls it a successful summit. What's your take on that, Ann Coulter?
The whole thing, I find it quite appalling, and I think it is a wonderful thing that Giuliani and Pataki aren't meeting with him. Amusingly, George Bush is reminding us why we lost the last election. Well, you can see what my newspaper's policy on this is.
Your newspaper, Human Events, front page lead story says, Jiang, go home.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm baffled by this whole thing. It really is odd what Maureen Dowd wrote a few days ago, that it takes Richard Gere to be the voice of moral authority here. It just seems so clearly wrong to be doing this. People, I mean, it seems to be big business interests, and people have been bought off by big business interests. Everyone says, oh, corporate welfare, corporate welfare. Well, here it is. They want to open up a big market and damn human rights. I don't understand the other argument on this unless it's tied to someone's pocketbook.
The Washington Post, by the way, writes this morning, why is it so difficult to work up any enthusiasm for the Accord or for the summit in general? One reason is the lingering suspicion that Mr. Clinton has become so set on developing warm relations with China that his administration would be tempted to overlook cheating in the future. Another is the undeniable fact that this summit produced progress in nuclear cooperation, good for Westinghouse, commercial aviation, good for Boeing, and tariffs on high-tech products, good for IBM and Motorola, but no progress on human rights. The Washington Post, a bit critical this morning. The Wall Street Journal says it was a successful visit.
Well, that may tell you the whole story right there. I mean, you know, when I've been criticized from time to time as too favorable to the Clintons, I pull out columns I wrote about China because I was in Tiananmen when the massacre happened. You know, the day after the massacre happened, I was around there. I saw what happened. I'm very critical of Chinese regime on human rights, Tibet, and other issues. At the same time, it seems to me, the human rights community has not answered some potent arguments of the kind that the Journal would make, which is, if we don't sell to China, our allies and our other friends in the world are going to. Japan, France, Germany, even Britain, which now has a more human rights-oriented government, have all been willing to go around any sanctions that were done in the past. And so the problem is, are sanctions by the United States effective in creating? Now, the fact is that in the immediate aftermath of the sanctions that were put on after Tiananmen, there was some brief improvement. But in the long run, I'm not sure that sanctions or, open hostility to the Chinese government, telling them to go home and all that, is really going to be effective. I think in the long run, we ought to be doing the kind of things that we do to, poor little Cuba, which is, radio transmissions, things that inform the Chinese people about what's going on. They don't know what happened on this trip. They do not know that President Clinton stood next to their leader, or the guy who purports to be their leader, the dictator, and said, your record on human rights is lousy. Said it in public. The Chinese people have no way, basically, of finding that out, except for the few of them who can go to a hotel in Beijing and see CNN for 5 minutes. I mean, they don't know this. And our government ought to be trying to inform them.
We have a half hour left with our roundtable guests this morning, Ann Coulter of Human Events and Joe Conason of the New York Observer. Then we're going to speak with 4 Chinese students that are in this country, and they're from Taiwan and Hong Kong and People's Republic of China, and we'll find out what they think. Let's go to Las Vegas. Thank you for waiting. You're on C-SPAN.
Oh, thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to watch C-SPAN and get some of the true news. I just watched the hearings with Babbitt babbling. But, Mr. Conason, how can you possibly say that they've released all of the documents? I mean, how do you know that? I mean, just
well, how can we ever know that? That's a philosophical question, isn't it? I mean, we can never know to a certainty that all of anything has ever happened, right? I mean, how would we know to your satisfaction? Should we let you in the White House and have you scouring around yourself? Would you feel satisfied then?
I think I could do a lot better job.
Well, come on up. Maybe they'll let you do it so they can satisfy you. As far as they have released truckload upon truckload of document, literally. Okay. Now, if you can tell me some specific things they haven't released, I'll tell you they probably should release them.
Who hired Craig Livingstone?
Let's let our caller from Las Vegas go ahead, sir. It's your time.
He addressed me, so.
And I did visit C-SPAN when I was in Washington, and it was a wonderful tour.
Thanks.
Let me say, though, they caught Hillary with that little paperwork in the room next to her bedroom, and I guess they did say that because there were tours at the White House, I could have planted it. And I did notice that the lady that found it, they called her senile. But part of their thing was that now Hillary said that she didn't work on that, and then they found out, well, but it was only 40 or 50 hours. It only worked out to like an hour a week. So in other words, she worked a week an hour a week the whole year, or did she put in a week and a half of solid? Or is this just something that they forgot, or is it another mistake?
Thanks,
to go
Las
over
Vegas.
Whitewater every time I show up here for some reason. I mean, this is pretty old news.
Let me switch the subject, only because of that we've talked about that earlier, and the gentleman got his 2 points on. Friday's New York Times has a picture of Al Gore and James McGreevey from New Jersey, who's running for governor, and right below that is Dan Quayle and Christine Todd Whitman, and I bring it up because of these races. There are a couple that everybody's been writing about: the New Jersey governor's race, the Virginia governor's race, the race for Susan Molinari's seat on Staten Island. If come Tuesday, what has to happen for this to be important in the political world? In other words, a switch or a change, or
Presumably a switch. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Christy Todd Whitman lost. What is really shocking in the abstract, I mean, if you were trying to speculate a couple of years ago, is it possible that Governor Whitman could be an incredibly tight race against some no-name Democrat, a year from now? You never would have guessed this. Well, some might have, because she has been, well, for one thing, generally sort of a moderate, but I think really what's hurt her is her veto of New Jersey's version of the partial birth abortion ban. That's an incredibly powerful segment. It hurts Republicans when they are pro-choice, and she's going to be hurt by it. It's already weird enough that she's in a tight race and she has the best campaign consultants money can buy.
If she were not pro-choice, she probably never would have been elected governor of New Jersey, okay, in the first place. Now, I think Ann is right to the extent that it's going to hurt her that position is going to hurt her now because she is going to be abandoned by people to the right of center. On the other hand, that is not the theme that's been emphasized in this campaign by the opponent. The opponent's been emphasizing, he has a very funny commercial on the air about all of the economic decisions she's made that are unpopular up there, having to do with taxes and you know, investing a huge amount of money in a road to Atlantic City for campaign contributors, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if she goes down, it will be significant for the Republican Party because it will mean that one more figure who represents moderation in the party will be gone from the scene. If she wins, I think it will probably be less significant if she wins. I mean, she'll be around and she'll still be there, but she'll be weakened. I mean, unless she does very well and surprises everyone.
On C-SPAN's Washington Journal, we go to Crystal River, Florida. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I had two little small comments. One, your guest, the lady there,
Ann Coulter.
and Miss Ann Coulter, she made a very big mistake when she was talking about it was a land scheme. It was a fraud. I'm retired from the RTC. I looked into this. I retired last year. Nothing ever happened there. It was something that was drafted, and it was never gone through. It never happened. There was no transaction happened on the part that Hillary Clinton worked on. It was the same way with when they looked into going with bonds or a way to finance the savings and loan there. Nothing happened. Things were put on paper, but there was no transaction. You can smile and laugh all you want, lady.
This is like disputing the law of gravity. There is a fact involved here. There was a full Whitewater report. It's been written up. You can see what the RTC officials in this case said. You can look it up. It's a government document. There was a one-year investigation.
You're talking about the Pillsbury report that exonerated the Clintons? Is that the report you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about the D'Amato
millions of dollars on by a Republican lawyer. The D'Amato Committee. Are you kidding me? You're going to present the findings of the D'Amato Committee and act as if that's disputing the law of gravity?
Facts. You may not personally like D'Amato,
come on.
But I don't think anyone has said that
what about
they were wrong about
the real
anything.
RTC investigation by Jay Stevens, a Republican lawyer that completely exonerated her?
Let me go
that
back.
One never gets mentioned.
Let me go back to Crystal.
Jay Stevens investigation
yes,
by
exactly
Clinton's
right.
friends.
Crystal.
No, that's not his friend. That's somebody he fired, Ann, and you know it.
Crystal River, Florida. You said you worked for the RTC.
I retired a year ago.
And when you worked for them, where were you headquartered?
I was headquartered in Arkansas. I spent a lot of time on all this stuff.
That's what I wanted to ask you, if you had spent time on reviewing the exact case, or were you just doing it on your own?
No. I was in charge of helping. I was just one of many that worked on this. She's totally wrong when she said Hillary Clinton did it. Her work on this was nothing. She did nothing wrong. She wrote.
Wait, I said she drafted an important option agreement. Is that what's being contested?
You tried to suggest
and that came up in the billing records.
You tried to suggest
an
she was
option
involved in a fraud.
agreement that had already been conceded to be fraudulent. There was one thing that remained to be discovered. Who drafted this option agreement? Someone from the Rose Law Firm did. We didn't know. Then the billing records turn up just before the D'Amato Committee ended, and it turns out in the billing records it was Hillary who drafted this particular option agreement. This isn't a matter of dispute. This just isn't something. You can say Whitewater is nothing, but this is a non-disputable
We got one at a time. One at a time. Let's let Crystal River come in, and then we'll let you go. Go ahead, sir.
It didn't matter who drafted what. It was not the draft that was illegal, lady. It was what some of the parties were going to try to do later on in that, which
yes,
never
that's the
came
same point I tried to make before. I hope people heard that. He said it's not what the draft was.
Let him finish.
There was nothing illegal. There was no criminal charges brought on that.
The statute of limitations had run.
Here she goes again. She wants to filibuster. You know, you're like all Republicans. You know, Republicans, you guys act like you're clean hands. And, you know, that you're above everybody else. And I'm an independent. I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. I even voted for Ross Perot the first time he ran. But,
well, that's very interesting. I haven't said anything about having clean hands. I'm just describing a matter of fact out of the Whitewater Committee.
Let's go to Chicago, and we'll keep this going here this morning on the Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make a comment about all of the discussion about the visiting president from China. And I'm sitting here with a J.C. Penney catalog trying to order Christmas toys for my relatives, and everything in here is imported from China. Now, we buy stuff from China, but the president of this country can't visit. I really don't get it. If we're so against China, why are we importing everything from China? I mean, even the Barbie dolls are made in China. What is going on?
Joe Conason.
Oh, well, I think the reason is very simple, which is that there's always a desire for cheap labor. And Chinese labor is some of the cheapest labor in the world. In fact, some of it is not even free labor. I don't know about the Barbie dolls or things in the JCPenney catalog, but we know that there are things made there with slave and prison labor. And unfortunately, corporate America has over and over again shown its willingness to go where the labor is the cheapest, regardless of the political conditions or whether the labor is free.
Let me ask Ann Coulter about two headlines here in this front page of the New York Times. It says, U.S. legislators bluntly rebuke China's leader. And then if I move that to the L.A. Times, the headline is, China's President Zhang wins Gingrich's vote.
I don't know what Gingrich has done.
Let me read that. It says, Chinese President Jiang Zemin paid a visit Thursday to the long hostile environment of Capitol Hill and emerged with an extraordinarily strong expression of support from House Speaker Newt Gingrich. After a contentious breakfast session between members of Congress and Zhang, Gingrich said China is moving in the direction of democracy and should not be viewed in the same way the United States once saw the Soviet Union. That's by Jim Mann.
Well, if this account of the facts is true, I think that's a mistake. And I think the last caller, I don't know if she's complaining about that we're buying things from China or complaining about buying things and then having some people complain about the meeting.
The inconsistency.
No, I think it is an inconsistency, though I would prefer, I mean, there is the concept of an ally, and an ally doesn't, in wartime, an ally doesn't need to be a friend. I would mind less some trade with the country, but you don't have to greet the leader, toast him, slap him on the back, not to mention have an entire screen up on the White House lawn so the American people can't see what's going on. That is really appalling. I mean, this idea that Clinton, the president, is embarrassed by American citizens and will shield the president of China from this, I think it's really appalling. And it's one thing, if we are going to have some limited trade, and I would not enthusiastically endorse that. I think there should be sanctions. I think there should be punishment for being some tin horn dictator. But if you're not going to do that, there is still a difference to go beyond that and meet with someone and toast him and slap him on the back like he's any other government leader.
Well, I hope the passion that the Republicans bring to this issue will continue when there's a Republican president doing the same thing, because it never existed when there were Republican presidents doing the same thing and worse. I mean, the fact is, when George, in the aftermath, well, that's a tiny minority view in the Republican Party, and maybe they were taking that position. I don't remember anybody in the Republican Party, Gary Bauer, any of the people who are making noise now, saying boo about the kinds of stuff that George Bush was doing as president with the Chinese dictatorship, which was a dictatorship then. It was an oppressive dictatorship. They were oppressing people in Tibet. They were jailing people and doing all the rest. And right in the aftermath of Tiananmen, Clinton was right that Bush was coddling the Chinese dictatorship in that moment, and nobody on the Republican side said anything. Now Clinton has switched. No, that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. Conservatives were indignant over that, and moreover, unless I'm wrong about this, this is the first time the Chinese leader has been to this country since 1979. Isn't that right? They didn't make a lot of noise about their indignation.
No, 85.
Since 89.
85, I think.
Yeah, since Tiananmen, none of them have come here. But the fact is, for a long time before that, it was Republican policy, at least on the part of their presidents and whatever leadership existed in Congress, to be pro-China. And the reason that was the excuse that was offered was that this was a balance against the Soviets in some way. And, of course, there were nice trade benefits to be had besides. But the fact of the vile oppression that the Chinese government was committing against Tibet and against its own people did not, upset many maybe some,
No,
but
I really
not
think
many
you're wrong
conservatives.
about that. I mean, it's also true that Nixon, started EPA, pioneered affirmative action, imposed wage and
He was
price
a liberal.
controls. Yes,
was
as
a
a matter
liberal.
of fact, his policies were rather liberal. I mean, conservatives defend him because liberals hated him so much. But just because a lot of things were done under a Nixon
Well, I'm not
administration.
talking about Nixon. What about Reagan? What about Bush? I mean, the answer is that there was little.
I don't think Reagan
there
was
wasn't.
coddling
You
the
heard
butchers of
maybe
Beijing.
you heard a lot of noise about China in those days. I didn't, from the Republican or the Democratic side. More from Democrats back then.
Joe Coniston, New York Observer executive editor at our table. He's based in New York, down here in Washington today. And Coulter, human events legal reporter. On the front page of the Washington Post is a picture of Chinese President Jiang Zemin, his interpreter, and former Secretary of State Henry A. Kissinger, who introduced Jiang yesterday at the luncheon. We've got to take a call, but I want to ask you both about Mr. Kissinger's picture and the papers this morning.
A.
Clearwater, Florida. Thank you for waiting.
Good morning, Brian. Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Joe.
Morning.
I was going to talk about something in the paper, but I have to comment about that caller from Crystal City who claimed to be a member of the RTC. And you have to understand that people who are liberals and who have a venom against finding the truth resort to name-calling, calling you names. It's really unfortunate. Joe, I'd like to ask you, when is you and your paper going to call for Senator Dodd to appear before the hearings? Because if you recall, 2 weeks before the election, he claimed that John Wong was a very good friend of his, and then he disappeared out of sight. When are you going to call for John Wong to appear? Number two, when is someone going to ask Mr. Zemin to get Charlie Tree back from China? I haven't heard that brought up once on any prominent newscast in the last 3 days. I'll wait for your response.
Thanks, Clearwater. Joe
I don't think the committee has asked Senator Dodd to testify. I guess
he's disappeared.
If they ask Dodd to testify, I imagine he probably would go, but they haven't asked him, and
probably out of senatorial courtesy.
Yes, I mean, if
odd?
Senator Thompson doesn't want Chris Dodd to testify, I'm not going to sort of make a big fuss about it. The second thing is, I believe that quiet representation. I think it's been reported quiet representations have been made to the Chinese government about Wong, but presumably they should do more. I mean, I think it would be very good for John Wong to.
Wait, how come you're willing to defer to this Republican committee, but not the D'Amato committee?
Well, because I have a lot more confidence in Fred Thompson than I do in Al D'Amato. I'm from New York.
Let me ask the two of you about these pictures of Henry Kissinger and President Jiang. Here he is on the front page of the Washington Post, and there is another picture in today's Washington Times. And in the article by Gus Constantine, this quote, President Jiang, just as President Nixon went to China to represent American interests, you are here to represent the interests of China, said Mr. Kissinger. The former Secretary of State, citing the, quote, parallel interests in many respects, unquote, of China and America, praised Mr. Jiang's planned 6-day sojourn in the United States. Any comment?
Well, Ray Joe's comment that Kissinger's support of China is proof that the Republicans support China.
Exhibit A.
I just want to say this is almost beyond human capacity to bear. This is like someday I'll be having to defend what Christy Todd Whitman has done as a Republican or William Weld as a Republican.
There's some
I do not now, and I will not defend what these moderate Republicans do.
Let me go beyond, because in this analysis there are some trigger organizations for our audience that I want to read to them. At the luncheon, sponsored by a group of 6 Asia-focused organizations, including the America-China Society, the Asia Society, and the Council on Foreign Relations, Mr. Jiang expounded on China's recent accomplishments. He cited China's 4,000-year history at every opportunity to defend Asian values. And when talking about the whole issue of Tibet, he said in a luncheon address, according to the Washington Post, Jiang defended China's human rights accord in Tibet by comparing the brutal suppression of an internal uprising in 1959 with the emancipation of American slaves. Quote, today's Tibet is developing prosperously, and people there are living and working in happiness and contentment.
Well, there was feudalism in Tibet before the Chinese invasion and suppression, but it wasn't replaced with anything better. It was replaced with brutal dictatorship, with what amounted to ethnic cleansing of a weird type, and suppression of religious freedom, and these things are all terrible. And I think even the Dalai Lama would not want to go back to, pre-Chinese Tibetan social system. They don't believe in that anymore. They know that there were a lot of problems with that, and that you know, they had a feudal system that was outdated, but they do want democracy, they want autonomy, and they want to be able to run their own lives free of Chinese interference with their religious practices. And I think, you know, I hope they get that someday. As far as Kissinger is concerned, I mean, look, he represents big business interests. You know, what is rarely mentioned when they show his picture on there is he has a consulting company. You know, people on right and left have criticized him over this. He works for big American companies and foreign companies, for that matter, that want to do business in China. And when they see his picture with the president of China, it's very good for his business, frankly. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't hold the views he holds, but in fact, they're all part of one thing, which is the pursuit of business and military strategic ends that have very little room for human rights concerns in them.
Could I say something about this Lincoln thing? I'd heard about this, but it is so despicable. I didn't want to cite it until I had actually read it, and now that you have, I mean, that really evidences my point about how despicable it is for American officials to meet with him. If he can compare the brutal repression in Tibet to freeing American slaves, and our government officials are just meeting with him and toasting him and, oh, how do you do? It's wonderful to see you. It is just the death of truth and the point of having any sort of dialogue with this country.
Well, the other thing that bothers me in what the part you read was the reference to Asian values, as if somehow Asians value human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so forth, less than we Westerners do. I mean, I've been to Asia. I met a lot of Asians. Never met one who didn't believe that they ought to enjoy the same freedoms that we do under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if nothing else, which China allegedly subscribes to. So the references, I always find very suspect, the references to Asian values. Worse even still when Westerners make those kind of references to justify these policies, but just as bad when someone like him says.
On the C-SPAN Washington Journal, we're going to meet 4 Asians, 4 Chinese in our downstairs studio in about 15 minutes and talk about the visit. One little note here, and I'm not sure what it means, but I just found it this morning and I wanted to show it to you on the front page of the New York Times. In light of all the stories about Pol Pot, it's just interesting that the photograph, color photograph on the front page was taken by Dith Pran of the New York Times, and some of you might remember the name Dith Pran. He was the famous photographer of the New York Times that was featured, among other things, in the Killing Fields movie with Mr. Schanberg, and he is still taking photographs for the New York Times. Was played by Hang Nor in the movie, I think, and who was later killed. Let's go to Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to talk about the human rights issue. You know, I don't think the United States can criticize China or anyone else for human rights as long as we have our Auschwitz abortion clinics and the president signed the executive order for fetal tissue research, taking these children and taking their little body parts and giving them to scientists. We have no right to talk about human rights.
All right, caller, thank you very much. Ann Coulter.
That one's definitely for you.
I agree with his position on what this country is doing. I think it is really hideous, but I guess I would disagree with the conclusion that I can't criticize my own government or another government as much as I can criticize my own government.
Mr. Coniston?
Well, that actually wasn't what the caller was saying. The caller, I think, was saying that our government, not you personally or me, but our government should not criticize the Chinese government.
They're not. He's toasting him.
Right. But if we had a government that was willing to be more critical of China or more hostile, that they couldn't do it because of abortion rights. And of course, I don't agree with that at all. But
USA Today, Harvard getting stirred up. Katie Sigelman and 15 other active members of the Harvard-Radcliffe Students for a Free Tibet have struggled for 3 years to bring attention to what they see as the Chinese occupation of Tibet. The visit tomorrow has sparked energetic political debate, according to Fred Bales in today's USA Today. A Harvard Crimson editorial called Zhang, quote, an evil man leading a truly evil government, unquote, but said he should be allowed to speak. Why is it there's such wide opinion on this from people who are liberals and conservatives? And I mean, what seems to dictate what you think about this man and this visit?
I don't know. I must say, I'm quite baffled by it. I mean, all the usual suspects defending tyranny, college students, Hollywoods, seem to be against tyranny in this case. And perhaps I should leave it to Joe to explain why communist dictators in the Soviet Union were treated differently from communist leaders in China.
But let me ask you, you went to school up there at Brandeis near Harvard, and you know Harvard very well. Here is the Harvard Crimson, their newspaper, saying he's an evil man leading a truly evil government. What do you think is going on here?
They have a point. I mean, look, with the end of the Cold War, I think it's easier now for liberals and conservatives to find common ground. And I mean, Anne may be confused, but I actually think that in this country we have some shared values on the left and the right. At least some people do. And they include concern about religious liberty. You know, back in the bad old days, there were plenty of Democrats and other people on the left who were very critical of Soviet oppression. Helsinki Watch was started by liberals and Human Rights Watch. You know, many Democrats were on board for dealing with issues of Soviet Jewry and many other issues involving Soviet suppression. So I don't think it's quite as simple as human events would like to make it seem that liberals were pro-Soviet and all the rest. I think that's nonsense.
Well, recall the reaction to the evil empire speech, because the quote is almost parallel here, and that's the point I'm making. I mean, everybody went mental when Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire. It's saber-rattling, blah, blah, blah. Why but the different reaction now?
Well, I mean, the fact is, luckily, Reagan's rhetoric did not match up with his actions in the end, and I'm sure people at Human Events were very disappointed about that. I mean, he ended up making very important peace agreements and arms agreements with the Soviet Union, and that was the right thing for him to do.
We loved Reagan.
Pache, you know, the far right of his party. But, you know, I think, Brian, the short answer is Americans do share some values, and they include the values of the Bill of Rights and concern about, you know, obvious, hideous oppression of people abroad.
We have time, I think, for just one more call, and then we're going to be talking about the Chinese leader's visit with 4 Chinese students who are here in this country. By the way, at Harvard, according to the Fred Bales article, there are 500 graduate students from China. Let's go to Toluca Lake, California. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you for C-SPAN. There's one thing I would like to say about Hungary. Didn't they beg us to come in and when the Soviet Union took them over? I think it was Hungary or Poland. I can't remember which. But what I was really trying to say about China itself, it was amazing to see on C-SPAN the House of Representatives today trying to boycott that about the nuclear waste going to Nevada, and here we're going to be selling nuclear engines or components to China. And I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Both of them are wrong. Both parties are absolutely for the big business and the hell with anybody else. And that's all that counts. And it's really a shame. And it makes you feel that you're not too happy about being a citizen of this country anymore.
Thank you, caller. We'll let their comments stand and take one last call from Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Ms. Coulter, keep up the good work. I think you've got Joe on the run.
I don't think he thinks so.
Go ahead, caller.
Something that was missed on television the other day by most everybody was Ms. Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was making a talk, and she said, just think, this premier of China actually put tanks on his own people. My goodness, has she ever heard of Waco?
All right, caller, thanks. He brought up Nancy Pelosi, and there have been several articles about Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, both Democrats, both liberals, both from California. One is a friend of Jiang Zemin, the other is not, meaning Nancy Pelosi is not. How do you explain that? Have you thought about how can 2 people from the same state, the same experience, same San Francisco, Chinese community there, be on these 2 sides of this issue?
Well, I never understood why people could be on 2 sides of the evil empire speech, as I mentioned before, so I'm really not one to explain this.
Well, I think it's because there are real differences of opinion about how to advance human rights in China in both parties. There are people in both parties who believe that the way to do this is to have engagement, to have as much exchange as possible, and who believe that we have, you know, for strategic geopolitical reasons, we have to deal with the Chinese, at least be able to talk to them about nuclear sales and other issues such as that about Taiwan. Wait, so, you know, I think those can be honest differences. Some people honestly believe, whether it benefits big business or not, that it's better for us to have commerce with China, student exchanges, and I don't think that's it's not the position that I take. I would argue for a tougher line on the Chinese, but I understand why some people believe that.
We're out of time, and I'm sorry, Ann Coulter of Human Events, the legal reporter, hometown New Canaan, Connecticut, Cornell and University of Michigan Law, not Cornell Law, but Cornell graduate, and also Joe Conason, the executive editor of the New York Observer, New York City native, Brandeis graduate, used to be a national correspondent for the Village Voice, and Ann Coulter used to work for Spence Abraham, also was a clerk for...
Attorney for...
intern for Evans and Novak's, and we thank you both very much for joining us, and we'll talk about the Chinese situation in a few moments.
At 9 Eastern, C-SPAN starts gavel-to-gavel coverage of the U.S. House as it comes in to take up the Charter Schools Amendment Act.